latest favourite story is Memory Wall by Anthony Doerr, and it's the title story of his short story collection. And I'm quite surprised that I loved it so much because it's 85 pages long. It's just brilliant. It's astonishing, it's moving, it made me cry every time I read it. And it makes me think that it sort of unpacks in this beautiful way, and there's something about the structure, and it moves between points of view, and it's got so many layers to it that I can only imagine as a writer how unbelievably hard it must have been to write it. It's just sublime story, and it's one of the only stories I've read recently that made me want to stop writing. It was that good. Most of the time when I read something fantastic, I think I must go and write now, and it really inspires me. And this one was like, okay, why am I bothering? It's just that good when there's something like this out there in the world. There's a story I wrote a few weeks ago which was published today actually, and it's actually published on the blog of the Wellcome Collection. And the Wellcome Collection is this fantastic place in London where its whole ethos is the merging of art and biomedical sciences. They have an exhibition called Dirt, and I decided, I'd been interviewed on the Wellcome Collection blog. Actually, I'd written 2 blog posts for them about my ideas about fiction inspired by science. And so then I thought, well, how about I say to them, what if I write a piece of flash fiction inspired by the Dirt exhibition? Would you like that? And they agreed. So the story is called Her Dirt, and I guess it's about 500 words long. And because it's the one I most recently finished, I guess it's my favourite for the moment. No, I didn't write it in one go, and that's something that's very interesting for me because it is actually flash fiction, and for me flash fiction is anything under 1,000 words. I left the Wellcome Collection and started walking down Euston Road, and I was meeting a friend in Baker Street, and I already started trying to ferment ideas in my head about the story, and it took a couple of goes, and basically the first couple of ideas I came up with, I could feel that I was just pushing it. And then just before I got to Baker Street, this first line popped into my head. At first, her dirt was enough, but then it wasn't. And suddenly, in that first line, or possibly first 2 sentences, a whole character came to me suddenly, and I had this complete rush of ecstasy. And somehow all the stuff I've been trying out opened the way for this character to turn up. And she was there, she was right there. And all my stories start with the first line that comes to me, and it comes with a voice, whether it's the character's voice or of quite a strong narrator's voice. The main thing firstly is to get the first draft down, and so you have the whole structure of the story and the ending, and then go back, and basically these days what I do is read it out loud to myself, and it's all about the rhythm. And I tend to write them in a very short burst, a complete story in about 20 minutes. Well, it's more about a feeling you get, especially I think with flash fiction. And when I write things in one go, I almost start to end as I'm beginning the story. And I think flash fiction is almost all about the ending. I think short stories themselves are a great deal about the ending in a different way from other forms. The ending's got to be both vaguely predictable and yet surprising, and it's a hard balance, but it's kind of, I think, it's to do with practice. And once the end was there, and that was pretty much the first draft, I didn't really change it much at all. So no, I didn't really make any major changes to the story, partly because the way I work, the slow process of waiting to see what comes, I don't push it, so I don't go down wrong tangents. If I feel it's wrong, I just stop. No, absolutely not. I never ever know how it's going to end when I start writing. With longer stories, I think I need to think that I'm in control. I need to imagine that I know where it's going to end just to keep me going, even though what I really want to be is completely surprised. We all have this sense of story, the sense of what makes a good story, this sense of a narrative arc. And if you let go and let that story sense guide you, it will guide you to the story. For me, the most important element is voice, possibly because that's what comes to me first when I write. Don't try and sound different, but try and write the only story that you could write, or only you could write. I started when I was a child by reading Roald Dahl short stories, and that's what turned me onto the short story, I think. I'll never forget the one about the woman who killed her husband with a leg of lamb and then cooked it and served it to the police officers. I mean, that was astonishing. So that was my idea of short stories for quite a long time, and then I found the short stories by Ali Smith. And that changed everything, because that showed me what else a short story could be. Her short stories are very intimate, and a lot of them are written with the I character and a you character, and you feel like you're standing right in between these two people. There's a fantastic writer called Georges-Olivier Chateau-Renaud, and it's very nice to get a chance to say his name out loud. And he's won every French prize for literature, and yet this is the first time his short stories have been translated into English by an American press called Small Beer Press. And it's a travesty, frankly, but at least we finally now have the collection. And it's called A Life in Pictures. There's an American writer called Roy Kesey, and it's his debut collection called All Over, which was published in 2007. What Roy Kesey showed me was minimalism. He makes the reader work hard. And I, before that, had thought, no, I must give the reader much information. I can't make the reader work. I can't make the reader wonder what's going on here or fill in between the lines. And Roy Kesey was like, no, I'm going to make you work really hard. I was inspired by reading that collection to write a new story, a flash story, in a complete different way from anything I've ever tried before. And that won 2 flash fiction competitions. So thank you, Roy Kesey. And that's why I say you should buy his book. Finally, I'll mention, because I could go on and on, fantastic American writer who is 90 years old. Her name is Carol M. Schwiller. So she's been filed under science fiction, and she was described to me as feminist science fiction. And it's what I would call surreal, magical realism, but the bottom line is highly, highly imaginative, fantastic, fantastic stories. But she clearly at some point also understood that you can make the reader work, and that they'll love you for it. Because I think that if you make the reader work while they're reading a story, they get inside the story. They're creating the story with you. Having read Anthony Doerr's story Memory Wall, it covered everything in that story. It covered memory, which already is something that's so vital to us and is something that's changing now in the 21st century with the increase in the prevalence of Alzheimer's, and also with our attention spans and our easy, we're distracted all the time. So he used this theme of memory, but he covered life, death, he covered history, he covered parent-child relationships, he covered love and marriage. Just, if I could write the perfect story, I would like to think I could cover all of those things. Well, I've just spent the last year as writer in residence in the science faculty at Bristol University, spending a day or 2 a week in a biochemistry lab. As I mentioned, I studied maths and physics, and I have a huge love for science. The science lab and science and scientists in general are huge sources of inspiration for fiction writers. I love the words, and now I'm going to have trouble remembering some of the words, but for example, there's the word lamellipodia, and it doesn't even matter what it means, does it? Because it's just beautiful. And then there's all the stuff. There's the pipettes and the test tubes and the purple latex gloves and all of it. I was very, very lucky to be awarded an Arts Council grant last summer to work on a second collection of short stories, which are partly inspired by the time spent in the biochemistry lab and partly inspired by this astonishing, beautiful work of scientific literature, which is a book called On Growth and Form, which was published in 1917 by Darcy Wentworth Thompson. And it was a groundbreaking book because it was the first book that looked at biology and zoology and botany from the point of view of maths and physics. Next year, I'm really fortunate to be asked to be teach another Arvon short story course with a great friend and colleague, Adam Marek. As the editor and founder of the Short Review, this is something I do for love, as does my deputy editor and all our 30, 40 reviewers around the world. We review short story collections, 10 collections every month, and interview as many authors as we can. Anyone who thinks short story collections aren't being published, they are. You just have to search them out a little more. You have to dig a bit, but it's the fantastic small presses that are pioneering, that are publishing amazing, amazing writers, and it'll be worth your while to look for it.